Welcome to the center of the universe and the home of the 18-time Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts. This is the X's and Argos podcast with Ben Grant and JB.
Welcome to the X's and Argos bi-week special brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing. Ben Grant, joined as always by JB, and we have reached the Argos' third and final bi-week of 2024. I actually can't believe how quickly the season has flown by, but with 4 weeks and 3 games remaining, there's no time for rest in Toronto. This is it, JB. This is crunch time as the Argos prepare for their final 3 games. On today's podcast, we'll take a quick look at the super secret trade deadline that came and went today. We'll catch up on all the week's news, answer a number of mailbag questions that have been piling up in the background, and we'll go through how we see the CFL season wrapping up for the Argos and for the rest of the CFL. All that and more is coming up on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. Before we get into things, I want to tell you about a great beer called Longboat Pale Ale, and it's brewed by Something in the Water Brewing, our title sponsor. You've got to check out Something in the Water Brewing. They've got a wide selection of fantastic beers, award-winning beers, beers that have won awards from around the world, not just locally, and there's plenty of those awards as well. They are highly recognized, and it's because their beer tastes great. You've got to drop by Something in the Water Brewing in Liberty Village. If you go by to see an Argos practice, stop at Something in the Water afterwards. Go into the Argos hosting Red Blacks game in a couple weeks. You got to go to Something in the Water beforehand. Drop by. We're planning on being there for that one too. So Something in the Water Brewing, make sure you check it out and try some Longboat Pale Ale. All right, JB, let's actually, before we get into things, I just want to, we do this so rarely, but please, if you're listening to this, take a moment, subscribe if you haven't already. And I hate starting podcasts off with this. I listen to a lot of pods myself, and I know you want to skip past this right now as I'm telling you to subscribe and leave a comment and everything else. But it really does help other Argos fans find us, and it helps us out a lot too. So if you haven't subscribed to this show and you are a regular listener, please take a moment to do so. And shout out to all of our YouTube listener watchers as well. It's it's a growing community. It still hasn't quite caught Spotify or iTunes or anything like that, but we're generally up over 400 now, which is great to see that that group of people slowly adding their numbers every week. So again, thank you for listening on YouTube as well as all our other podcast mediums. JB, were you expecting a huge day at the CFL trade deadline day today?
I will openly admit I did not know it was CFL trade deadline day.
It is the most secret trade deadline in all of professional sports. And to be fair, it's because so rarely does anything happen. It's just, it's not a... First of all, football's not a sport that is conducive to a lot of trades to begin with, but the CFL season, it's so late in the year. There's only 3 games left of an 18-game schedule. It's a lot to look at making a trade at this point of the year. It doesn't make sense generally for either team, so it's why there aren't a lot of deals done. But there was one today, and it was the Montreal Alouettes dealing running back Joshua Antwi to the BC Lions for a 3rd-round pick next year. I was a little surprised at the move. He's a Canadian running back who gets playing time. He's also got that magical punt ability, that short punt ability, the quick punt that we've seen burn the Argos and several other teams where on 2nd and 20, he just taps it forward a foot and jumps on it. So that's just at least one thing that East Division opponents won't have to worry about in the near future. But yeah, that I don't know what was behind that move specifically, but that was really the only action. Do you feel like the Argos needed something? Like it's not something that really occurred to me, but like, were you thinking, hey, they need to make a move before the deadline?
No, I don't think so. I think, I mean, maybe, but I think what they need, you wouldn't probably be able to find. Like, of course, you'd love to have a little offensive line depth. You'd maybe love to add another linebacker, but I mean, these are things that are not available. No, I thought that they were, guys starting to get a little healthier, and there was no really, crying need. I do think, that Kelly has got a lot more sort of road underneath him. So I think the need for a veteran quarterback to back him up has lessened, which I talked about a lot last year. I think that he's gone through quite a bit, so I think that they're in pretty good shape.
three transactions this week that involve former Argos players. The first one, Brian Scott, released from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers practice squad. I was sad to see that. Again, he's a guy that you and I think both were cheering for. And I really thought that might be a good situation for him. I do feel like teams missed the boat a little bit on him. I'm not sure what it is either. I don't see the same thing that some talent evaluators have seen, because I think he's a perfectly good backup quarterback and a guy that I would have no qualms about throwing into a game. And I certainly think he's better than a number of rostered quarterbacks around the CFL. So hoping that he does find his way and is picked up by another CFL team. But I really did think there might be some room for him in Winnipeg when Chris Streveler went down. And so, yeah, it's a little surprised to see his release this week. Marion Benoit re-signed in Hamilton after being released earlier. And this one's interesting because you remember how much it was talked about when Benoit Marion was signed by Hamilton. When that move was made, a lot of Argos fans were upset. But again, it goes to show like the Argos talent evaluators have been pretty spot on. When you look around the league at players that were released that fans were upset about. And again, nothing wrong with being upset at a player being released. As a fan, you grow attached to these guys. You like cheering for them. It's sad to see them go, no question. And Benoit Marion right up there. He was a fan favorite, so much fun to watch. Loved watching him play special teams. So of course, yeah, you're upset about it. But in terms of like some of the guys like Rasheed Bailey and things like that, these guys, it's not like they've gone on to go, blow everything up on other teams. Like Rasheed Bailey is still on Ottawa's practice roster. Benoit Marion was on the roster and then was released instead of being brought to the practice roster. And that's just been the case with a lot of these guys. And so I think maybe just something to keep in mind the next time the Argos do make a transaction and you're like, oh man, this guy's so good. Why did they let him go? Wait to see. Because more times than not, you'll find that those guys generally do hang around for a little bit. And the interest from other teams isn't what we may have thought it was when the player was released. And then Jordan Bird, released by Hamilton. I was excited to see him get into a couple games, excited to see him return. He was another preseason favorite. I know fans loved watching him at Guelph, an exciting returner. And so, yeah, he was released and hopefully he can find his way back somewhere as well. All right, JB, if you were to guess which one of the Argos would 100% be on PFF's Team of the Week after last week's game, who would the most guaranteed player be? Would it be someone that might have kicked 8 field goals?
Yeah, I would have thought certainly my player of the game and my nominee for a special teams player from the East would have been my first guess.
Liam Haralahu is an outstanding field goal kicker. Last week, he broke an Argos record, 151-year franchise. He broke a record going 8 for 8 in field goals, and he was not on PFF's Team of the Week. And I don't actually have a problem with it. We're going to get into PFF a little bit later in one of the mailbag questions. It's because, unfortunately, there was just a bad luck situation where you had Brett Lawther for Saskatchewan going 7 for 7, and his average field goal length was longer. Like Hiralahu had a bunch of short field goals that were from in tight, and Lawther's were now. Liram's longest was longer than Lawther's, but his average field goal length wasn't close, and so I assume that's why Brett Lawther ended up getting the nod. But yeah, of all the things, on the day that you go 8 for 8, isn't there another guy in the CFL that went 7 for 7, that would have tied the previous Argos record. So that's an amazing achievement in itself. And it just happened to be the length of some of those field goals was the difference. So yeah, I was stunned when I opened that up and saw how is he not on here? And because I didn't realize that Lawther had hit that many. I remember watching that game thinking there were a lot of field goals. I didn't realize there were 7. But the other guys we praised in the game did get recognized. We talked extensively about Tunde Adeleke, about Mark Milton, and of course made mention of Tavares McFadden. All 3 of those guys recognized as players of the week for their respective positions, but no Toronto Argonauts on offense. JB, are you surprised after a 517 net offensive performance with 234 rushing yards that there was not a single Argo on that list?
It always strikes me as odd. I find that it seems to be counterintuitive. When they have a bad week, somehow 4 Argos make the list. and when they play well, somehow they don't. So I don't know why that happens to be. I didn't think, oddly, anybody stood out, which I think is probably a really good sign for the Argos when they win. I don't think there was sort of one offensive player who drew the eye. We talked about it on the pod. It was just a really complete professional game from an offense. They moved the ball really well. They spread out the passing, they spread out the running. I think, it goes to show you that a lot of times what you want is not necessarily award winning. It's like you can have a defensive lineman with 17 sacks and not be a very good defensive team. I think the Argo team effort was responsible for the win last week.
I was surprised there wasn't an offensive lineman somewhere in there. But my own offensive line grades for this past week's game were a little bit hit and miss. Like guys that ran blocked well didn't pass protect well, and guys that pass protected well didn't run block well. And so I really do get how that happened and how that went down. But it just seems weird. Like you have such an outstanding offensive performance, but like you said, it was so spread out. Because even the running, 234 running yards, and Gideon Carey had 90 of them. And so it really was divided. There wasn't a single player where you're like, well, man, that guy has to be. But then usually that's where you would find an offensive lineman. But it just wasn't to be. That's okay. They'll take the wins over any sort of personal acknowledgement always. So I don't think any of the O-linemen will be complaining when they've got a win under their belts. All right, JB, let's get into how this season will end. There's 3 games left. 4 weeks left. And coming down the stretch, not a lot of room, not a lot of wiggle room in the West. The East is a little bit more sorted out. But I just kind of want to go through these last few weeks of the season and kind of look at how we expect Toronto to finish. And then I'll maybe fill in some of the gaps around there. So Toronto's remaining schedule, they've got a bye this week. And then you've got on the road, at home, on the road. So it starts with at Winnipeg. The good thing about being at Winnipeg, and there aren't many, the good thing about being at Winnipeg is it's coming off a bye week. And Winnipeg will have been traveling to Hamilton after playing a couple of tough games in a row. Then they're at Hamilton, who is playing as well as any CFL team right now. Hamilton hasn't lost a game in well over a month. Winnipeg has won like 7 straight, though. So that is a battle of the juggernauts. Hamilton was the 3rd team on the power rankings this week, replacing the Edmonton Elks in a bunch of different polls.
My Edmonton Elks.
Your Edmonton Elks. So yeah, that's going to be a battle. And Winnipeg's coming off of that, playing Toronto, who's coming off a bye and really needs those points. So I think that's the one good thing about that matchup. But Winnipeg, a tough place to play. Only 5 losses Winnipeg has suffered at home since the pandemic. So that's never going to be an easy one. And then the next week, they host Ottawa in their final home game of the year. And then they wrap it up in week 21 at Edmonton to play the Elks in a game we're not sure of. Like it could be, there's so many possibilities by that last week that it's so hard to predict how it will happen. That game may be meaningless for Edmonton. It may be meaningless for Toronto. Toronto may have already locked themselves in. It's possible they'll have locked themselves into 2nd. It's possible they'll have locked themselves into 3rd and not need. And in fact, the way that I've played it out, I don't actually think they will need that last game. I think they'll be going into week 21, I believe, in 2nd and not needing the win. Because I think Ottawa will actually be 3 points behind. So how do you see these last 3 games going for the Argonauts, JB?
Yeah, it's a pretty good schedule. As far as things have gone for them, you'd like to have you'd like to have more home than away. But I think having a chance to play Ottawa straight up is probably what's going to decide it. And I think that's the game that really and rightfully should determine whether they go, because I do agree with you. I think that final game probably won't matter if Toronto is able to get work done. Ottawa's got a pretty tough schedule coming down. Ottawa has sort of been better against the West and better at home, and they're playing the East and they're playing on the road. So I think Ottawa is in a bit of trouble here. They are leaking oil, and their final games are going to be a problem. Depending on what Montreal does. Does Montreal give Ottawa a big fight, or is Montreal happy to see Ottawa make the playoffs over Toronto?
Well, let's do that part of the puzzle. So Montreal's last three games, they host Ottawa. So they've got a bye this week, like Toronto and Ottawa both do. So they are coming off a bye with Ottawa coming off a bye. So no advantage there. They're hosting Ottawa. They're at BC. And then they're hosting Winnipeg. So Montreal's already clinched first place. So none of these games matter. And so think about strategically, what are they going to want to do? What are they going to want to show? I don't know the answer to that. My own personal thought is you treat the next game as the game like for your fans where you actually try and decimate the Ottawa Red Blacks. And I think you put out your full roster and full throttle. This is our full go game in week 19 against the Red Blacks at home. And then at BC, I think you rest as many guys as you possibly can with salary cap and everything else taken into consideration. And then I think week 21, you rest the guys that didn't rest at BC. You rest those guys at home against Winnipeg. Winnipeg will probably be resting guys too. That week 21 game that probably won't mean anything. Well, definitely doesn't mean anything for Montreal. Probably won't mean anything for Winnipeg. So that's my thought. Like, I think maybe just one game left where they're going to go full out. And I think it might be against the Red Blacks in week 19. Or do you say, well, hey, the Red Blacks might be a team we're going to face in these final. Let's not show them anything at all. Let's just rest all our guys this week. But because you're coming off a bye, I just see that as less likely.
I just feel if you're Montreal, I don't see how you look at Ottawa and don't feel like, well, we would rather play them than Toronto. I'm not saying Montreal is going to lay down, but I don't see any advantage to Montreal beating Ottawa. I don't see what you gain as an organization by that. I think that you would want you would certainly want Toronto and Ottawa to try and beat the hell out of each other in their game in the second last week. I think you would love to see Ottawa playing somebody in like Toronto having to go to Ottawa to play that game. So I really do. I don't feel like Montreal's going to push to win that game. I don't see why they would. I don't see the advantage.
The reason I say that I think they will is if you look at, again, think about Toronto last year when they had secured first place in September, early September, and had all those weeks left.
The argument is you try and beat the hell out of everybody all the way to the end.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's all the way to the end, but I think you're definitely looking at resting the last week. But remember, so Montreal's got a bye this week. So if they're resting again in Ottawa, you have back-to-back weeks with guys not playing at all, and then you're going to BC. Do you really want guys playing like all your regular starters in that game? Like that's the one you really want to rest guys in if you're going to rest at BC. And then the last week of the season, you don't really want to put a lot of guys out there. Maybe you try and give it a go against Winnipeg, but then they'll have a bye after that too. So they've already got in what's going to be a 5-week span. They have 2 byes built in where nobody's playing. So how many times do you want to rest your starters in those other 3 games? I'm just not sure you do.
No, we talked about it. That's the challenge for the coaching staff. How do you navigate that? Do you lean into the rest or not? And Toronto, I guess, sort of luckily this year does not have to kind of navigate that. They can just play ball every week like Montreal did last year.
There's something to that. There is something to that. So here's how I think it's going to shake down. I think Montreal is going to win one of their last 3 games. I think it's going to be against Ottawa, and then I think they're going to field half a squad at BC, another half squad against Winnipeg at home. I think they wrap up the year with 25 points, well ahead of everybody in first place. That's already decided. I don't know if Ottawa wins another game in these last 3. They don't look good right now at all. Like, I know we've been tough on Ottawa all year, but over the last few weeks, we've seen finally the Ottawa team that we've talked about most of the season, and it seemed to be Darius Pickett. The loss of Darius Pickett seems to have been what really turned this team, and it's so rare that any one player would have that kind of effect, especially a non-quarterback. But since Darius Pickett's injury, they just haven't been able to play winning football. And I don't know if they're going to be able to recover from that. At Montreal, at Toronto, hosting Hamilton, and I'm not sure that game will matter to them either. And that's the thing, like that last game of the season against Hamilton, if Hamilton loses once in the next couple of weeks, that Ottawa-Hamilton game won't matter anyway because Hamilton won't be able to mathematically catch them. So really for Ottawa, it's just about these last two games. The odds of Ottawa missing the playoffs are slim. Hamilton would have to win out. Ottawa would have to lose out, and I just don't see that happening. So now that would be an exciting final week of the season. I think Argos fans would love having wrapped things up themselves and getting to watch Ottawa and Hamilton duke it out for that final spot. That'd be great for Argos fans, but I just don't see that happening. I think Hamilton, in fact, probably loses this week to Winnipeg, in which case Ottawa has already clinched the playoffs at that point. So that, I don't know. I don't see any wins on the calendar for them, and so I would have them ending with 17 points. And I think Toronto probably win 2 of their last 3. Now, how that goes down, I want to wait and see how this week goes for Winnipeg and Hamilton. But I think they beat Ottawa at home, and then they will win one of either Winnipeg, at Winnipeg or at Edmonton. I think they win one of those 2 road games. It might actually be the Winnipeg one, depending on how this week goes against Hamilton and depending on what Winnipeg wants to do that week at home. But if they don't win that one at Winnipeg, then I do think they'll win the last game of the season at Edmonton. Either way, it'll give them 20 points and they would finish second. Ottawa in third.
Winnipeg clinch with a win?
Yeah, so Winnipeg's already got they've already got the playoff spot. So if they win this week, they're sitting right now at 18 points. If they end up with 20 points, it depends on what Saskatchewan does, because Saskatchewan they still have 3 games left. They could still run the table in theory. So they can't clinch with just a win. They would need some help on that. So they can clinch first place this weekend.
And maybe a win and a loss.
Yeah, a Saskatchewan loss, a Winnipeg win. And they're golden, but we'll have to see what happens, because I think that would be ideal for Argos fans. If Winnipeg can win, Saskatchewan can lose, then maybe that makes the trip to Winnipeg a little bit easier in that sense, because it is the toughest place to play in the CFL.
Yeah, the Winnipeg Hamilton game is huge for Toronto.
And then for Hamilton, I really see them having to win out. Like, unless things go sideways for everyone else. I know Hamilton's playing great football, but this is why I hate that the old adage of the season doesn't start till Labor Day, because it's completely wrong. Hamilton hasn't lost a game since early August, and they may win out and miss the playoffs. That shows you how wrong that statement is. The season counts just as much pre-Labor Day as it does post. Hamilton essentially eliminated themselves before Labor Day, went on fire from like August onwards, and it just wasn't enough. Now, again, they can still make it. They're mathematically alive, no question. But just the way I see this breaking down, I see them finishing with 16 points. I actually think they win 2 of their last 3. But I think they finished with 16. Ottawa's in third with 17. Toronto in second with 20. Montreal in first with 25. That's how I see this working out. So
the dream of a Toronto Hamilton Grey Cup in BC.
Yeah, well, the crossover is tough for them, because the reason the crossover is tough is because you have to actually have more points than the other division's team. Even if you've beaten them in your season series, that doesn't matter. You actually have to have more points. And right now, they're looking at the BC Lions with 18. The BC Lions with 14. Hamilton has 12 right now. And you look at BC's remaining schedule, they've got Calgary coming up this week, and that alone is enough to cause problems, because you're going to need to pass them. It means you're going to need to have 4 more points than the Lions will throughout the end of the season. So again, it is possible, but Hamilton would have to win out, hope that BC only wins 1 game, and also hope that in the process Edmonton doesn't win all 3, because that would eliminate things. So it is still mathematically possible for that crossover. It just seems really unlikely. I think that'd be cool. Wouldn't that be fun if they went on, they continued their tear?
I would love it, but I would also take the over on flags on Calgary this weekend.
Yeah, we'll see how that turns out as well. So, this it is an exciting. Like, this is so much more exciting than the last couple seasons where it seems like it's coming down to the wire for everything. And in the West, we're not going to spend nearly as much time. This is an Argos podcast, but the way I see the West turning out at the end of the year, I think Winnipeg wins 2 of their last 3. They win the West with 22 points. Saskatchewan, I also think, wins 2 of their last 3. They're second in my mind with 19. BC wins 2 of their last 3. They have 18 in the end. Edmonton wins 2 of their last 3. They finish with 14. And Calgary wins 1 of their last 3. And they are at the bottom of the league with 11 and have the first overall pick in the 2025 CFL
maybe
draft.
get themselves a Rourke.
Yeah, well, that's although Curtis Rourke, as well as he's playing right now, isn't going to be in the CFL. He looks like he's got his team at 5-0 in the Big Ten, like at 5-0. I know they've got the tough part of their schedule coming up here, but he's playing great football. You watched him against Maryland last week. He's turning heads in the NFL. And so we'll see how that goes. I still think he's drafted. I still think he's drafted in the first round for the CFL. But yeah, I think at this point, it's looking almost more likely that he'll end up in a different league. So we'll see. Maybe he is the next Calgary Stampeder, though. Who knows?
I think the end of the schedule works out really well. That Ottawa afternoon game, the home game for Toronto for all the marbles, I think is a perfect way to kind of wrap up the season.
That is, like, ideally there are 2 more home games for the Argos, but I think to make that happen, it has to be a win. Like, that's the one game that you can't afford to lose. You could lose one of the other 2. They need to beat Ottawa at home a couple of weeks from now, because if they lose that, then all the math suggests that they're going to finish 3rd. And really, depending on what happens in the other games, are suddenly having to look in their rearview mirror again, depending on what Hamilton does.
You have to win that game. But I like that. I think that's what you want. You want must wins. It's a great advantage for teams. It's always been that way, that you're always better to have must wins than coast into the playoffs.
In almost every sport except NFL, for some reason the NFL doesn't quite work that way, but in most of the other sports, like the President's Cup, the league champion, like the Argos last year, they tend not to win Grey Cups. Look at the Argos last year, the Edmonton team that they tied with that same record from years ago. These are not Grey Cup winners. It is far more difficult to put it in cruise control for the last several weeks of the season and then suddenly try to fire things up again than it is to just, you've been in a fight week after week after week and you keep going. You're already in that mode. So it's not like it's easy doing it that way, but it seems like those teams come out on top more often than not. And that's the position the Argos are in this year. And we've talked about it before on the pod, JB. I know, like, so many Toronto fans, and I'm sure Toronto players, I'm sure Toronto coaches would love the opportunity to go into Montreal in that East final and settle a score or 2. All right, JB, over the last several weeks, we've had a ton of mailbag questions that we have not been able to answer. Our normal segment, our Pick 6 segment, brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing, not running during our bye week this week, but we have all of these leftover questions from weeks past where people have submitted their questions. If we answered them, they'd win a 6-pack of beer from Something in the Water Brewing. And this week I thought, why don't we go to some of those great questions that were asked of us and see if we can answer them as part of this bye week special. So let's get into this. I'm going to turn this first one over to you, JB. This is a question from Gary, and it's about replay review. And I know you and I have talked off pod several times about this. Gary says, I'm okay with automatic reviews for scoring and change of possession plays. I'd like to know your thoughts on what plays should and should not be eligible for a coach's challenge, especially with a focus on pass interference and roughing the passer.
Well, I to quote the one great Bill Belichick, I think every play should be available. I don't see any reason why there's a single play that's not available for video replay. Whether something is considered a judgment call or not, that's fine. Then you can make the judgment call again based on the video replay. There's no decision made on the football field that shouldn't be based on an interpretation of a rule. And I understand that, some are definitive, like if your toe's out of bounds, and some are more subjective. But subjective doesn't mean made up or imaginary. Like, subjective is, things that are made based on parameters. I don't see any reason why every single play can't be challenged, and you just limit the number of challenges you have. But I mean, I feel I feel strongly that that they should be able to do that.
I don't really have a problem with that. I go back and forth on this because, and it's pretty extreme, which is sort of like me, but I'm okay with your suggestion. I would be completely fine with that. You can challenge anything you want. I think you only get one. You can challenge anything you want. I have heard some suggestions about there being a penalty for losing the challenge, which I think is also an interesting thing, just to discourage random challenges.
Exactly. Because I think you want like in the NHL where they have the offside challenge and people just throw it because like, well, why not?
Right.
And I think you want to discourage that kind of disingenuous or just throwing a dart at a dartboard kind of play. There should definitely be a penalty if you're wrong. I think you definitely have to have that in the mix, but I don't see any reason why you can't challenge. Now I know people say, well, if you challenge holding, you're gonna have holding every play. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you have holding every play, then maybe that's a problem.
Yeah, that's the one I'm not sure about because you can find it, and it's so tough to like. I don't like the dartboard nature of that. Like, I don't like the idea of calling a flag on, like, let's say you got a sweep to the right and the left tackle's holding on it. Like, is that enough to draw a flag? Because they don't even throw that when they see it's away from the play. Like, officials won't throw that. If they see a receiver holding on the far left side and it's a run play off to the right, they're not throwing a flag because they know it has nothing to do with the play, and officials won't penalize a team in those situations generally.
And then, not to get too far in the weeds in this, but then I think maybe the argument would be that you should codify some of this stuff and codify that backside holding is not holding.
We're just getting into a lot of like, there's going to be a massive document here on the replay system, but again, I'm okay with that, and I'm also okay with throwing most of it away and limiting challenges. I really hate, and we've seen a lot of it this year, I really hate when replay decides games, even when it's right. I just don't like it. Like the other day, BC Hamilton, a pass interference penalty that was called on replay is what won the game for the Ticats. I think the call was correct. I think it should have been pass interference. I think the replay review was right. It just seems like a really unfortunate way to have a game end, and that was such an exciting finish to a football game. You'd love to see it not finish in the command center, but
my other sort of addendum to it is also I believe that replay should not be slow motion.
that's interesting. But
That you simply just play it, and if it's egregious enough to see it on replay, then that's fine. And if you can't make the call having watched it again at game speed, then the call stands.
I don't know if I agree with that one. I understand where you're coming from because I certainly, when you slow it down, you're far more likely to see the flag.
These are all things that make it a little more exciting.
Yeah, but I think with like spotting the ball and did he step out of bounds and things like that, like I think you want to be able to slow that down because there's a reason that the guy in the field missed it.
Also, I want it live on TV.
That I do want, and that's a change I would love to see. I want to hear everything that is said back and forth. We've talked about this a lot. Other leagues do it. Rugby does it. Lots of sports have gone through that sort of that transparency of going and giving you the conversation they're having. Yeah, I want to hear those explanations. I do love that suggestion. But yeah, I guess my answer is pretty wishy-washy. But I'm okay with going the extreme one way. I'm also okay with throwing it all out altogether. I
like it. I'm all for it. Let's do it. Let's get those rules out in the light. No more rule book, and then also another rule book that we actually follow.
The next question is from Jerry, and he says, I keep hearing how good the Argos roster is, yet there are issues. Are the Argos really just an average team, or is the parity among the teams at an all-time high? I'll take this one first, and I do think there's a lot of parity this year. I think any team, we've seen that, any team can beat any team. Look at, like, the Hamilton Tiger Cats swept the Argos this year. I know they're playing great football right now, but they're not the same team. You can have Montreal go into Calgary and tie that game and really should have lost that game. It is a strange year this year where you look at who is able to beat who. And in terms of the Argos roster, this is a good Argos roster. It really is. But they don't have the depth they had last year. They may never have the depth they had last year ever again. Like, they had unparalleled depth last year to a point where they were able to put up that 16-2 season. And was it Chad Kelly was like had one loss as a starter last year. Like it was an amazing season last year. But you look at this year without that same kind of depth and with the injuries they've got, and this isn't even the most banged up the Argos have been this year. Listen to the guys currently on the 6-game roster, and just on your fingers as I go, count the guys that you view as starters. All right. You got Richie Sandani, 6-game, Robert Priester, 6-game, Quincy Moget, 6-game, Jonathan Jones, 6-game, Jamie Harry, Jonathan Edouard, Brandon Calver, Darius Sirocco, Isaiah Cage, Gregor McKellar, Daniel Kwamu, Woody Barron. There are a ton of starting caliber guys on these 6-game injured list, and it's been like that all year. The whole season, there have been between 10 and 12 guys on the 6-game injured list. We haven't even seen Darius Sirocco at all yet this season. The all-star center last year, the center that was the best in the league last year, hasn't even made an appearance. And the Argos are still playing good football, but yeah, it's 8-7 football instead of what would have been 12-1 or 12-2 at this point last year. It's just a different team without that level of depth.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is a good roster. It's not a great roster. It is a talented roster. It has stars in it, but I would disagree with anybody who said that this is a great roster. It is. I think it's a roster. It is an 11-win roster. All things being equal and being healthy. It's not a 14-15 win roster. I think that's fair to say, and I think that's fair for people to keep in mind. When watching, I think when they play well, they can win. But the margin for error is really thin, and when they lose, usually it's from mistakes that they make. It isn't a question of them choking or them not being ready to play. It's just a question of them, just losing to a team that was slightly better on the day.
The next question I'm going to give to you first, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase it because it's from a couple of weeks ago. This is a question from Peter, and it's about Mackay Polk and how the release of Rasheed Bailey was made so much easier by Polk's play over the last few weeks, and we've even added to that in the last couple of weeks. And Peter says, I see him playing a huge role in this offense for years to come. Do you agree? Is this a player that the Argos can maybe build a receiving core around?
I mean, definitely. I think that's exactly why they made the move, which was a bit shocking at the time. I think Polk has a nice relationship with Kelly, which is what you always want. That a receiver and a quarterback kind of trust each other, see the field the same way, they have a sense of timing. They definitely have that. Polk is very fast. Polk seems to have really adapted to the Canadian game, which is not always the case with American receivers. I do. I think that he's, that he can be, I think he can be a star, really. I think, given the opportunity, I mean, you could argue he's a star already. I mean, he's certainly a very good football player in terms of consistent performance. But yeah, I think the organization felt, and you and I agree, that he really is something. He flashed early and kept building on that.
The next question is from the Gary Stern parody account, and he's put in questions pretty much every week we run this, and he's finally getting a question answered on the pod. He wants to know about the Canadian receivers and why the Canadian receivers are always lined up to the far side. Is this a force of habit over the years? Is it an anti-Canadian bias by coaches? Is it a perceived lack of talent? And of course, he ends this question with Alouettes win. I think I'll start this one first. The reason, so it's a little bit of all of that, but if you look at the numbers available, the number of Canadian receivers available coming out of universities every year versus the number of American receivers available coming out of the NCAA, NAIA, it's not even close. And so saying that the American receivers are better isn't an insult to Canadian receivers. There are some tremendous Canadian receivers, but we don't have nearly as many as Canadian football players in general. There just aren't nearly as many. Here, look at the basic math here. There are, coming out of U Sports every season, there are about Well, actually, no, let's not even do it like that. Let's just go like a whole body because that's probably easier to go. So currently, right now, in U Sports, there are 27 teams in U Sports. You've got about 100 players per team, not dress roster, just like on the roster. So that's 2,700 players, about 2,700. Remember that number. NCAA, you've got over 77,000 players playing NCAA football right now. And the top 1% of both end up in the NFL, or at least around NFL camps. We see Canadians every year that go down there, the best Canadian talent, offensive linemen, receivers, running backs, you name it, go down to the NFL. The top 1% of those Americans end up in the NFL as well. But at the end of the day, you're still left with 76,000 American players that aren't in the NFL. And there's so many to choose coming up here, so many receivers, especially now that so many college teams are playing these spread offenses with so many starting receiver positions. And so it's really tough. As a Canadian receiver, it is very tough to take an inside job away from an American, and it's extremely tough to play the boundary side. I think, Curly Gittens Jr., one of the only receivers that you see on a healthy roster playing on the boundary side of the formation. And so that's one of the reasons that we don't typically see the Canadians slip into the prime spots. But I think that is changing a little bit with the big-bodied Canadian receivers. Like, you look at how the Argos lineup this year, like guys like Sandani and Kevin Mittal, those guys are playing inside. They're using Dejan Brissett inside. He's not playing the outside spot. That's Ungerer's spot. So I think that has changed a little bit. It's not just one Canadian receiver at Z, at that wide field side spot. I think most teams now do have a Canadian there. I don't think there are a lot of American Z receivers. Not many. I think there's two that I can think of. And then for the inside positions, that tends to be now where you're seeing the big body Canadian receiver. So I do think that has started to change recently. But there's nothing wrong with not having the best receivers in the league be Canadian. They're still great. But again, you're just dealing with such a numbers disadvantage that inevitably there are going to be more talented players available to you from the U.S. Next question is from A. Chan, and I'm going to throw this to you, JB. When Chad Kelly first came back, he was aggressive. His throws generated some turnovers, but he seems to have dialed back to a point where they're maybe a bit too conservative. What is the right approach to a Kelly-led offense?
Well, I think the right approach is a balanced approach. I think you can't get away from the run. You have to use the run. I think you want to build in short passes as part of the plan and not just as, escape valves when the deep play doesn't work. I think you get Kelly into the rhythm of throwing short and middle level passes as part of the game. And when you have those two things going and the defense can't just play that deep umbrella, then you're going to see moments where there's an opening and, you want Chad to run for sure when there's an opportunity, when they only rush three. He's gotten better at picking his runs and he is a good runner. And then you take your deep shots when they are there. I think a patient offense and a one that sort of demands, Chad follow the rules as opposed to Chad just pure gunslinging is from where I sit, I think an ideal offense.
The next question is from Bob, and he asks, how does the PFF system work? Ralph Hawley gets 3 sacks, but a Hamilton defensive lineman is the defensive player of the week. Why? So, first of all, I get the frustration. We led off the show talking about Liam Haralahu and him not being honored as the special teams player of the week. I respect the PFF system. It's not perfect, but I actually do like it a lot. And I think they've got a lot of very talented...
Is your Collinsworth bias?
And I do love Chris Collinsworth, and I also really like Bryson Vesnaver, who's the PFF guru for the CFL, and I think he's got a great eye, and I think he does a fantastic job with it. It is very tough to do, and I think Bryson would probably tell you this as well. The one disadvantage that they have in doing this, and just to be clear, like their job, they're watching every player on every play. This is a time-consuming job. It is going through film again and again. It's hours and hours and hours of work to come up with these numbers. But the thing is, whether it's me doing my own personal grading or whether it's Bryson doing it for PFF, we don't know the play call. We don't know the responsibility. Now, we know enough about football to be able to say, okay, this was probably his assignment here, but we can't be 100%. I know I've talked to people around the CFL who get frustrated sometimes with PFF grades because they're like, oh, this guy got a good grade, but really he messed up this, this, and this, and no one saw it. It's because we can't. Like, we don't know what their actual assignment is. And so there are going to be mistakes. But I think for the majority of the time, I think Bryson does a fantastic job. I think PFF does a fantastic job. It's great to have access to this data that we didn't previously have, someone going through, because again, while I spend time on Toronto doing that, I don't even do the whole team for Toronto. I just do the O-line because it's so time consuming, and to have it available for like the entire league is a blessing and something that I really appreciate from PFF. But how that system works, essentially PFF is grading every player on every play on a scale that goes from -2 to +2, with 0 kind of being what you would expect a player to do on that play. And so on a play, the right guard, and it's different. They have different rubrics for every single positional group as well. But say, right guard on this play, he blocks his guy relatively well for just long enough for the quarterback to get the ball off. That's going to be a 0. You're only getting 2s and -2s if it is an absolute crunch time hero play, a pancake block that absolutely crushes an all-star defensive tackle on the last play of the game to open up the hole for your running back to slide through and score a touchdown. That's going to get you a +2. The last second touchdown in the corner of the end zone that is, one hand caught by the outside receiver, that gets you a +2. The strip sack at on the last play of the game, the quarterback loses it, the fumble gets recovered, goes back into the end zone. That's going to be a -2 for that quarterback. But most of the grades are 0 plus half a point, minus half a point, and then they put it into their fancy matrix, and it spits out the numbers that we have. So that's how that system works. I know sometimes optically you look at it and you're like, how does a guy with 3 sacks not win defensive player of the week? Because it's not about statistics. It's, statistics are flawed in some cases. A quarterback can have a great game from his point of view, but his receivers drop a bunch of balls. PFF doesn't punish the quarterback for receiver drops. Statistics do. And so you might have 3 sacks, but maybe you also weren't able to shed any blocks for the entire third quarter, or on important 3rd and 1 situations or something like that. There's always a reason for it somewhere in the film. So it is frustrating. I totally get it, Bob, but I think Bryson and PFF do a great job, and so you just have to kind of shake your head sometimes.
I know certainly also in the NFL there's a lot of raised eyebrows about it, but also I think some of that is a bit overblown. You don't know what the call was. Look, there are variations for sure on calls, but there are also, I think that the consistency of what you're asking players to do, and the rules that people follow, I think are firm enough that you can make a pretty good judgment on what people are supposed to do. I think some of that sounds a little overblown to me when they're saying, well, actually we have our safety do this. It's like, well, occasionally I think that's true, but I mean, at its base, football is a conventional game, and players play, rules within schemes.
Our next question is from D. Selesky, and he says, can you talk about the details of what a quarterback is looking in his pre-snap read, in particular when they simulate the snap and then make adjustments? So the way this generally works is pre-snap, the quarterback is trying to figure out what the defense is, and they know it's probably not how the defense is currently aligned, but they'll take a look at how they're currently aligned and kind of think about what the possibilities are from there. So for example, like if you got a halfback, or let's say you got a Sam linebacker out in front of your slot receiver, but there's also a halfback deep also over that same receiver, there's a pretty good chance that Sam linebacker is coming on a blitz. And so those are things like, as the quarterback's looking over the line of scrimmage, he's trying to kind of gauge, who might be coming here, and also what coverage might this turn into. Like, sure, it looks like it's going to be man 2 right now, or it looks like it's going to be cover 2 right now, but what might it end up actually being? And so they know what their own receivers are running. They're now trying to figure out where those weaknesses will be in the defense, because every defense has a weakness. And so if you can anticipate that pre-snap, if you get some sort of hint about that, it makes your job easier. So if they run that simulated snap and the defense kind of gives away what their coverage might be or where that blitz might be coming from, you now know with the play you've called what throw you're most likely to make, or maybe you need to check into something else because maybe the defense they're running is actually perfect for shutting down what you've got dialed up. And so, for example, if I'm running from left to right, I've got a hook route, a corner route on my left side, and on my right, I've got a post, a seam, and a dig. And I'm lining up pre-snap, and I think it's going to be cover 2, then I'm thinking, hey, I'm going to hit that post route because that's going to split those two deep defenders, those two deep DBs, and I run a simulated snap, and then suddenly everything rolls around, and I realize, oh no, this is going to be cover 3. Now I no longer want that post route at all. Now I'm thinking about the dig route instead, or maybe I even think about switching into something else. Maybe I think about calling a run depending on the down and distance. So that's what goes into a quarterback's process pre-snap. Next question I'm going to throw to you, JB. This is a question that I want you to answer because I know you are also a soccer fan. This is about ties. Should the CFL, this is from
draws,
David.
we like to call them.
Yes, this is from David. Should the CFL change their overtime format to prevent ties? Because right now, as it stands, it's 2 possessions, and then if it's still tied at the end of that, it's a tie game. So he says maybe starting at the 55 instead of the 35. Should the CFL find a way to reduce or eliminate ties, JB?
No, I think whoever has a draw deserves a draw and deserves everything that comes with it.
I hate ties. A tie is a loss. I want to eliminate ties.
You deserve it. You deserve all of the anger and frustration and regret that you have foisted upon us as a viewing public. So I don't mind it at all.
This is what I want. If there's going to be a change, I want to say that in overtime, the team that does whatever they're doing to tie the game loses. They lose unless they go for the win. So in the case of a field goal, anyway. So let's say we're in our second phase of overtime. Ottawa kicks a field goal to go ahead by 3, and now Hamilton responds on their drive, and they kick a field goal to force the tie. I feel like that's a loss for Hamilton. They have to go for it. They've got to get the touchdown or else they lose.
What about a tug of war at the end?
Fine, sure, whatever, a coin flip. I don't care. I don't want
No, tug of war is much better than a coin flip.
Agreed, but I think it's just going to go through more of a process in terms of the players' union. But I don't like ties. I do not want to end games in ties. I hate having a third column. Even in our picks, I hate it, where we've got wins, losses, and ties. Get rid of ties. There's nothing good about them. It's got to be a win or a loss for me. JB, this is the last one I'm going to send to you. This is from Connor, and he says, in the past, the Argos have always been more successful in the postseason in years where they were more mediocre in the regular season. Do you think this adversity we're facing now will help in the long run? You've already addressed this, so I think we know your answer.
Yeah, I think it's been shown that teams that have to fight their way into the playoffs are often playing at a higher rate, a tighter rate. That you're building momentum as opposed to teams that are kind of killing time. This year there is no dominant team, so I think it's going to be a fantastic playoff because, Montreal is right there, but they're not. I don't think they're going to coast the way other teams might coast, but yeah, we'll see. It'll be a classic study in it. If Montreal goes out in the semis, it'll be further proof that that it's just really hard to go into the playoffs not playing tough football.
And our last question is from Russell, and Russell asks, which 2024 Argos sub is most likely to crack the 2025 starting lineup? This is a really tough question, especially because there's so much turnover year after year. But I've got 3 guys that I want to throw out there, and I'll do it in order. I think number 1, Kevin Mittal. I think Kevin Mittal is a starter next year. I don't think there's much question about that. And so, not only that, I think he's going to be a really good player in this league too. So I think that's the most obvious for me. There's 2 Americans that I think are worth thinking about. Isaac Darkangelo, we've seen put together a couple really nice games. Could he be someone we see as a starting will linebacker next season? I think there's a really good possibility there. And Jordan Williams, a guy that we kind of forgotten about, I thought looked great early in the season when he had to come in and replace Jared Brinkman. Then he went down, and Ralph Hawley stole the show. And it's Ralph Hawley and Brinkman now. Jordan Williams kind of forgotten about on the practice roster, but he's a great player, and I could totally see him coming in and actually working his way into being a starter. I don't think that's as easy a path as I see in front of Darkangelo or Kevin Mittal, but those are the three guys that I look at. In agreement there, JB, or is there anyone else that I may be missing?
Yeah, no, I think so too. In the secondary, there have been so many guys that have sort of gone in and out. Obviously Milton is playing a lot right now. I think he can be a day one starter next season. I'd love to see. I think also Benji or Franklin, can lock down the spot in that secondary.
But those guys are already starting now, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I know they've been moving in and out, but I wouldn't say they were sort of day one, week one starters. I would say that they sort of have rotated through. But I agree. They have started. So I don't think there's anybody deep on the bench other than, as you mentioned, that I think is gonna make a jump. Generally speaking, you slot into where you slot in.
It's time for Put Me Down for 20, JB. A bit of a rough week for you. It was back-to-back winners for me, so all is right in the world. I'm standing at 241 golden fleeces at the moment. You have 134 and a half golden fleeces of your original 200. But again, far more respectable than last season when you had already dipped into
true. I still... A win could help here.
A win would help. And so just before we give you our picks, a reminder, do not take any of our wagers seriously. We are wagering fictional golden fleeces. You should not risk any of your hard-earned money based on anything we say, and only ever bet what you're happy to lose as the cost of entertainment. So JB, I'm going to take honors here, and then I'll give it to you. So no Argos game this week, so we're making two non-Argos bets. I'm putting 10 golden fleeces on Edmonton on the money line at plus 112. I like the Elks this week. I think that's not a bad price for a team that's kind of in desperation mode, coming off of great tests. There's back-to-back games against Winnipeg. And then my other 10 golden fleeces, this is a home run swing for me. Kenny Lawler for the Bombers, first touchdown at plus 950. I don't usually take swings like that. I'm a grinded out kind of guy.
A siren's call the first touchdown.
Yeah, I know
we shall see.
I know it is. But plus 950. Come on, Shirley Lawler. Come on.
I will look. That's where the call comes from.
I know. Over to you, JB. What do you like for your two wagers?
Well, it has not been a great Golden Fleece month for Team JB here, and there's not, and our friends at the Unnamed Sportsbook do not love a lot of juice for the Argo or CFL games. I think they would prefer if people did not bet the CFL. Nevertheless, I will respond to the masses, those who called me out in person and on social media, and I am going to back my Edmonton Elks at plus 112 at home to bounce back with a resounding power ranking win. It was shout out CFL power ranking.
Yeah, it was so funny seeing you not just called out on Twitter, but seeing you called out in person at BMO Field. I thought was fantastic. Hey, JB,
all I can do to respond to that level is to double down.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what are you doing with your second wager?
And my second, the only other juice being offered out there, I am going to take my winless on the road Calgary Stampeders against the BC Lions. It's plus 285. Does Calgary have one last breath in them to kind of spoil BC's desire to be to have a coronation at home? Probably not, but I'm going to give it a shot.
From the man who has lost 12 of his last 14 bets, how can you go against Calgary and Edmonton?
I believe the clinical term is chasing it. So I am clearly chasing it at this moment.
And we'll shift to our CFL picks. Last week you were 2-2. I was 3-1. We both lost BC in that overtime loss to the Hamilton Tiger Cats that I still can't believe happened.
For God's sakes.
If you want to see, I just wrote an article at Three Down Nation. If you want to check out what happened to BC in that final drive, because I loved their final drive of regulation until they got to the 12-yard line with 28 seconds left and didn't throw a single ball into the end zone. And to me, that it was just inexplicable when you've got Nathan Rourke and you desperately want to keep the ball away from Bo Levi Mitchell, who had connected on his last 30 passes. That's not a situation that you want to get into in overtime, but there they were. So if you want to check that article out on Three Down Nation, it is there available to you. So I currently stand at 40, 25, and 2. JB, you need a rally here. 34, 31, and 2 is your current record. Let's get into this week's picks. 3 games on the slate. Winnipeg at Hamilton. I am taking the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in this game. Where are you putting your money, JB?
No, I did not take the big odds here, but I am going to take Hamilton. I think Hamilton at home. I think they're playing really, really well. I think it's a huge game for Hamilton. It puts them in the mix. It keeps them in the mix for the final 3 games if they're able to win this. I like Hamilton at home.
Yeah, and that I think it's 4.5 point spread. Like I think that's a tempting play, but I think straight up I still like Winnipeg. But yeah, I totally understand that Hamilton is playing great football right now. It was a tough call for me to take the Bombers. Calgary at BC. I am taking the BC Lions. I am not taking Calgary for the rest of the season, I don't think. How do you see this game going, JB?
Well, as I peer over my hedge, I think a BC Lions win at home is likely.
I hate so much when you hedge your bets. So your best bet is Calgary wins, and your pick is the BC Lions.
Well, I think I made clear my best bet was a man chasing a dream.
Yeah.
So now this is a different man, and this man doesn't have to chase the dream because I'm much closer to you.
Saskatchewan at Edmonton for the final game of this 3-game set this weekend. I'm taking the Edmonton Elks. True to my bet. Are you taking the Elks as well, or are you hedging this one too?
No, I will also. All bets are off here. We're in playoff mode here. We need to catch up to you, and you are reachable. So I'm taking the Rough Riders here.
Well, that will just about do it for us on this bi-week episode of the X's and Argos podcast. The Argos off this week. They return to action Friday, October 11th at Winnipeg, a game that is going to have huge implications for the Toronto Argonauts and the rest of the East Division in the playoffs. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see you.
Together, fight the foe.